Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Masterclass Moments Live with Dr. Joel B. Kemp. I am Dr. Kemp, and I'm excited to have you with us this evening for our conversation. It'll be a rousing time for a conversation before it's any indication what's going to happen. Make sure you tag this, get a friend, maybe an enemy too, and get them in the house for an exciting time together. As always, before we begin and bring to the stage our special guest for today, I always begin with a simple Hebrew word of the day. Our word of the day for this episode is chayil. Chayil. If you want to try to spell that in English, it's Chayil. So Chayil. Chayil. This is a word that's often translated to mean things like valorous or mighty or strong, and it's often connected with certain kinds of biblical heroes. One of the things that's interesting about this word is that it appears in the book of Ruth, not only to describe Boaz, but also to describe Ruth herself. So oftentimes in English translations, they don't translate Chayil the same for both Boaz and Ruth. But in the Hebrew context, both are viewed as kind of valorous, noble, strong heroes and heroines, if you will. So as we think about kind of our conversation about heroes and villains, it's always interesting to keep in mind who the Bible identifies as heroes and how that may differ from how we sometimes think about it in our modern contexts. So as we dive into our conversation today, I have the distinct privilege of welcoming three women that I think of as Ruths. And the Hebrew Bible calls Ruth an Eshet Chayil, which is a noble woman, a virtuous woman. So today we get to welcome three virtuous women into the JEL fold. And these are family members and some that you've seen before. First is our standard amazing host, the Reverend Dr. Dominique Robinson. He's hanging out with us in Texas. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. It sounds like a line right out of Coming to America, but I am very excited to be here. And I just want to tell those of you who are tuning in, you definitely want to tag somebody, you want to share. Tonight's conversation is going to be a little spicy. And I also want to say before they get here, they profess to be his mentees too, but I want you to know that I'm possessive and they finna come. That's all I'm gonna say about that. As Dr. Kemp introduces these other, how do I say this in Hebrew again? He is ladies, okay?
Right.
I want y'all to know that.
Exactly. So we'll call them the other Eshet Chayils. Eshet Chayils.
We'll just make them hot ills. Is that a word?
It's close enough.
Okay.
So we get to welcome really family. Well, we first met at Candler when they were students, and now they have graduated and gone on and pursuing their doctorate of ministries as well. So bring Ty and Tiffanie to the stage and to join us for a conversation on biblical heroes and villains. Hey, Ty, Tiffanie, welcome.
Yeah, you all sound like M&M's. Ty and Tiffany, welcome.
Oh, wow. It is just so much hateration happening tonight. Like, before our names even hit the door, the hateration was just waiting on us.
Right. That's how you know you're welcome, right?
That's how you know you are welcome in this family time. And so, hi, everyone.
They kind of hated Jesus, but in the end, they were screaming for him.
Right, there you go. We just left that season, right? So
Perfect.
Exactly. So no, you were preaching this weekend. If you had that at the top,
you should have.
Right.
Help us, Holy Ghost. Wonderful audience. What you all are listening to is an amazing Candler connection. Hallelujah. Ty and Tiffany were MDiv students at Candler School of Theology. So was I. I consider them little sisters too. Little is such a strong word. They are younger sisters. Because Black families, we give people nicknames. The person be kind of large and we call them tiny. So I don't really always like calling people little. They're the youngest sisters, and I want you all to know that the way that I will be shading them for the rest of today is called womanist sass, and they are more than capable of giving it back, which is why today's conversation is going to be spicy. We are so excited to be here with you, Dr. Joel B. Kemp, and we are giving an extra shout out to Dr. G, who's in the chat. Dr. G, the woman of God of Parfait, out there saving the universe, because we're going to be using all types of comic language tonight.
And I just really can't wait. I'm reclaiming my time mug. I'm ready.
There you go.
Oh, Dr. G say, yo, and the good Jersey makes it hears like air. Then when I read it, that's how I hear it. Right. But anyway, hey, y'all, Ghost Kitty, I always feel strange saying your name Ghost Kitty, but that says more about me than about you. Tag a friend, tell people to join in. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. And I hope that you all have taken the time to listen to the conversations that Dr. Kemp, the lectures that Dr. Kemp is giving. What is it called again? The something foundry, Candler.
Candler Foundry, yes. Yeah. So it's from a series of lectures that gave at Trinity Presbyterian Church as part of the Candler Foundry at Emory.
Yes, yes. Well, y'all, before we really dive into the content of today's conversation, y'all know we got to start with a little pop culture conversations. And I'm excited that my little sisters, my younger sisters are here because they be with it. And I do mean be with it. And they help me help Dr. J stay cool. You know what I'm saying? Like I'll say something to him and he'd be like, oh, I got to check out with Ty or Tiffany. I'm like, please, let's help keep the man young. Praise the Lord. So this is what we want to do for pop culture moments. Beloved, how do y'all feel about Meg Thee Stallion and Glorilla's song together, the collab? How do we feel about this?
Go Meg, go Meg,
Right.
go Meg.
I was already screaming, yeah, go for no reason at all. Okay. And I started gentle. I started gentle with this because y'all know Dr. Kemp is a musician. So I know he knows about this because he might be willing to admit he might not have known about this Meg Thee Stallion and Glorilla collab. Did you?
If I said yes, will you lose respect for me?
No, I know.
Okay. So yes, I have heard it.
Oh, snap!
So, and this is why we like Dr. Kim.
Yeah.
I'm trying to move up.
Come on. And am I saying your name? Listen, a Brother Bennett Sr., they did their good evangelism on that song. They did. And Meg Thee Stallion has been doing a lot of evangelism via IG with a lot of shaking, gyrating, and body. And so that is evangelism. I believe in the lived and fleshed Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing. I know Dr. Kemp knows about this. Dr. Kemp, have you listened to Cowboy Carter?
Yes. See, I had to keep you in suspense just for a moment because I feel like I got a lot of street cred, but I might have lost it all in one moment if I hadn't.
It was right out the window. It was no. Y'all not gonna do that to him because listen, it's okay. You want to know why? He's a scholar and a gentleman. He's on sabbatical. He's writing. He's lecturing. He might not have had time to live into all this pop culture world. This is why I'm behind on my dissertation now because I'm doing this. Hello. Right. He might have just said, Dominique, no. And this is for those of us who are reading books and writing. We need people like you to tell us. So, how do you all feel? Let us know in the chat. But beloveds on this line, how do y'all feel about this Renaissance Act 2? How do y'all feel about this?
It is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
But I expect nothing less. It's Beyonce. I mean,
Wow. Okay. Strong. Tiffany?
I think, well, one, I'm biased because I pre-ordered the vinyl. So I'm that kind of fan and person and record nerd. So, but I think that the collabs that she brought in, the way that she brought in the history of country is ours. It always has been, it always will be. And then also bringing in some of the new country artists to let their time shine as well. I just, again, as Tariana said, masterful.
Come on and tell her. Can you say her name again for the people who are watching and trying to figure out the apostrophe and the capital R?
That's Tariana. We say the whole name, Tariana.
Rihanna. Right out of Duval County, Florida. Yes. Like where we use apostrophes instead of hyphens. And I really appreciate that. I want to talk about how Jasmine, and I don't want Jasmine to think I'm against her. I'm not. I really support her honesty because this means you know this is a safe space. She put meh about the album. So look at y'all face, Dr. Kemp. Dr. Kemp, the musician on the line, one of the musicians on the line. Right. How do you feel about this? Because I feel like Tiffany and Ty answered not just as fans, but as media creatives, right? Who work with tactile pieces, and so they engaged in that way. But I want to hear Brother Bennett, his mind is blown. He said, I don't know if you mean you with the meh at the end, but based off of how you respond to Meg Thee Stallion, I feel like you with the So Dr. Kemp. What was your musical inclination, being a history buff, a recovering attorney? Because there's some things going on in that Renaissance Act 2. What did you think?
So one of the things that Tiffany mentioned that I appreciate, right, is kind of reclaiming or reestablishing the breadth and scope of what Black music and Black creativity and Black genius is. And so to me, to be able to engage in those kinds of discourses is important because a lot of people don't think about Black music shaping country music. They don't think about the African roots of some of the instruments that are integral to country music that literally were taken from us when we were stolen.
Now,
And so
Dr.
to
Kim, you
me,
don't have
those
to watch
kinds of
your phone. You got a little, we don't have a Hammond B3 organ on the line. But the minute you said
right,
that was stolen from us, I felt a little strength in your voice.
right,
A little quicken.
It
just
was
a little bit.
It was a little bit. Okay. Jasmine came back and said it really was just okay. Sorry, not sorry. Jasmine, you do not have to be sorry on this line. I am a chief apostle of a beehive collaboration and team here. And I want you to know these two young ladies on this line will tell you it has taken me some time to learn to appreciate. It took me forever to learn to appreciate. Right, I appreciate the history too. It took me a while to appreciate Renaissance Act 1. So I'm willing to just say it's going to take me some time. Now, the other thing too is I grew up holiness. So jumping right into these albums. First of all, to drop it on Good Friday, somebody's not praying. Okay. Right. So I was already feeling like we pushing it around here with this liturgical time and season. And, I'm still, the I don't want to talk about the no kind of way, but the real saints start praying Easter to Pentecost. Those of y'all who did that little Lenten season, bless the Lord for your Lenten season and the Lent in your pockets. So this is why I cannot develop my appreciation right now, because I'm going all the way back to my roots and I'm fasting from some of these secular music that bring about spirits. And speaking of spirits, y'all, on today, we experienced a moment right before they say in the Bible, it grew dark before Jesus commended his spirit into his Father's hands. And so on today, April 8th, Tiffanie, that's right. I told y'all we stand the clown. You can laugh. You have permission to laugh. And beloveds, y'all can laugh in the chat too. Tell somebody we here to clown, because comedy is a part of the way we continue to do this. But I just want to talk to spirits. It's a lot going on, y'all. Right. It's April 8th. It's April 8th. It's my Deltaversary. That has nothing to do with anything else, but it's April 8th.
Deltaversary, soror.
Thank you. And then it's April 8th. Beloved, we had a whole eclipse situation. The last time we saw one was 2017, and they saying it'll be another 20 years before it's over North America again, which means doesn't mean it won't happen again. You just need to have some money to be somewhere else, whatever. But what I want to ask in this biblical scholars group and these wonderful creatives is the combination of an earthquake hitting in Northeast. Y'all know I'm from Jersey, clearly you hear it with the 8, right? And the Richter scale being a 4.8. I'm just asking the prophetical questions as the people of God. That's right, Dr. G. See, Dr. G is with me. She's making a parfaits like I'm with Dominique. I know what she's talking about with the spirit. Okay. The Richter scale being a 4.8. We in the year of having a leap year. We had the extra day, so to speak. I feel like time change happened fairly quickly or earlier than usual. As well with the actual liturgical season. It seems like Easter was earlier than usual. There's a lot signs and wonders, earthquakes and wars and everything. Now, dear Bible scholars on the line, all of your various zodiac signs. We're also supposed to be tapping in and holding rocks and getting superpowers, which is leading us to our conversation with heroes and villains. What are you all's musings around all of these happenings?
I don't know that I'm saved or smart enough to have an answer for that.
I'm not gonna lie, it was a lot of your Georgetown words in that one, and I went to Bethune-Cookman, so I had to.
Can you feel the love in the house?
Wow. Did you all hear? What y'all didn't hear was them definitely. First of all, we're gonna call it. I love it though. It was a great HBCU elitism that just occurred with these two. These two basically was like, baby, I went to Spelman and Bethune, and your little extra words to ask. See, my grandmother would just say the Lord is on his way back. Let me ask the Bible scholar, Dr. Joel B. Kemp. Signs and wonders, stars and pillar of day by now, all that stuff, it meant something biblically. And there are a lot of people theologizing the various happenings. I don't want to say it's right or wrong. What I do want to say is there has to be something to some of this somewhere for it to be occurring the way it was. Not the man of God said, did the eclipse happen? I didn't know, I overslept. You know what? Come on, y'all. Dr. Kemp, what is just your general feeling around the connection or not between kind of stars, theology, zodiac, astronomy? There are some people who kind of put that separation between spirituality, secular and sacred when it comes to that. But from a Bible perspective, where a lot of the wise men, whoever they were, found Jesus by following some star, right? We as Black people talk about the star, the North Star, and the freedom. Who was it? Hezekiah having Hezekiah? Yeah, the sun standing still.
Yeah.
The children of Israel following these things by day and night that could have been argued to have been stars and or other celestial bodies. What's your kind of just general thought around theologizing astronomy or astrology?
Yeah, so I'll start by answering kind of in the ancient context first, which is,
Come on
again,
now.
so all of you've been with me, we start ancient and work our way up to the present. So in the ancient context, there's an understanding that God spoke through the natural world. And so to discern what God was doing, you could look at the natural world. And so part of the classes I teach on in faith and justice and the prophets, we talk about that one of the ideas of a prophet is that a prophet is an analyst. And and the prophet is trained to analyze these natural signs, to look at, okay, what is God's message behind these normal events that cluster together. So if you have an earthquake, eclipse, all within a short time frame, then, in words of the color purple, maybe God's trying to tell you something. And so therefore we try to think of it in that context. Certainly in African American history, how that gets received. There are various stories with Nat Turner and others who saw certain signs in the sky and felt that was evidence that God was calling them to begin a movement. So you still see that kind of tradition of how God speaks through the natural world. So I think within many branches of Christianity, that theme of God speaks through the natural world is still very much a part of many of our practices. That if we were discerning, where does God want me to be? One of the answers to that question is, are there things that happen in my life? Like, there literally been days I was trying to get to an interview and the bus never showed up. So if no bus to get me to the train to get to the interview doesn't show up, I take that as a clear sign that's not the job for me. So those kinds of things we still, in many of our Christian practices, kind of listen to as well.
Absolutely. So, in light of that, I've heard people. We've seen all over. Tiffany and I, Ty and I, we've been sending lots of memes and text messages back, or what we've seen on TikTok and Instagram. A lot of people talking about tapping into this time and season, quote unquote, with superpower, so to speak, which is leading me to this conversation around superheroes and villains. Is where we are in your series, in our podcast, both webisode and audio. So, also a reminder, y'all, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. If you have not done so, it's available on various platforms. Lots of rich conversation. And I know that's where we are in this conversation around race, the Bible. But I have to tell you, Dr. Kemp, and this is the question that me and TNT, who was Eminem on the line today, we want to know why, other than the Candler Foundry, yo, why are you teaching this to this white church? That it almost just it is just, why are you doing this? It feels uncomfortable watching you, because at times I feel like we feel like their questions obviously may be rooted in some genuine curiosity and or innocence, but it feels like they pushing back on just about any and everything you're arguing and saying when you are the scholar in the room for this content and material. Because it's just wonderful when they say, I have a question. It's a comment to quote unquote add to or shift the argument you offer. So, like, why are you doing this? Most people would say when a white person is doing this, there's this white what is it, not superhero but white savior complex. I'm sure, I don't know what the parallel is for black people, and I don't think that's what you're doing, but I want to know, why are you trying to save them?
Yeah, great question. So part of me wants to ask Tiffany to speak because you had such a intense expression, but I'll go first. um, Part of it to me is when I think about Black folk in America, and frankly throughout kind of the kind of Western or Atlantic world. Part of, and again, I'll be a biblical prophet, invoke a biblical prophet for a moment, right? Jeremiah instructs the people, pray for the prosperity of Babylon, because in their prosperity is your prosperity. And to me, when I first read that, I was like, God, I need another option. I need that prophet who's like, nah, this is just crazy. Let's be done with it. And that never really appears. There are moments of it. And so part of it for me in teaching this material, as Black folk, we didn't create this system. We didn't build it. And so while we have to survive under it and work to dismantle it, those who built it bear a special burden. And they are the ones who, for me, have to be enlisted into the fight. And so for me, my goal is to help my white brothers and sisters understand this is a battle that you have to fight. That it's, I don't want to be on the front lines anymore. It's your turn. And part of it for me is equipping white Christians in particular, but whites of other traditions, as they trace and find these vestiges in their traditions. What are you going to do? What's your skin in this game? And so to me, there are spaces I will never get into. That odds of me being invited back to that congregation or similar congregations grow smaller by the day. But there are people who are in those congregations who got it, and they can be the ambassadors of this message, to understand that Christianity and the lie of white supremacy do not have to be synonymous. That it's a failure to me of white Christianity that people can hold up signs that say Jesus is our Hitler. That's a failure. That's not on me to fix. I can point out the problems and help you understand how we got there, but that's on them to fix. And so to me, going into their spaces, in air quotes, is ways of trying to equip them to fight those fights. Because again, in their prosperity, we find prosperity. So that's kind of the Jeremiah framework that I often try to think about and kind of to fortify myself for those moments.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For those who are tuning in, I know this is your first time encountering or hearing from either Tiffanie or Ty, but I do want to at least highlight for those who are watching, Tiffanie is bringing to the conversation perspective from justice, advocacy, faith development in our kind of political sector of the world. So I want you to know that as a worldview or hermeneutic, some would argue, coming into the conversation. So obviously when she's bringing that feedback and other pieces of her scholarship, obviously that she will highlight, we have, and both identify as womanists. I can't say millennial or not, but womanist, right? Ty is coming from the perspective of as an educator for I don't want to just say they're not middle school. You're also an educator of individuals whose citizenship status at times is in question and conversation. So there's a component of social justice aspect in education, obviously with the various ways students are learning today and in today's society. So you're at I think, what is it called? A charter school? Is it called yeah, it's a charter school for our students, and also studying womanist preaching. And both, like I said, are creatives in various ways. And so when you hear from them, you'll hear that lens, that rhetoric, that conversation. And so as Dr. Kemp said, hey, Tiffanie and Ty and I were asking why you were doing this, but Tiffanie, what are your thoughts? What Dr. Kemp drew you in and said, explain your face?
You know, Dr. Kemp is also probably saying that because I used to say in class that it brings me great joy to dismantle white tears. And I don't say that to be mean or disrespectful or anything. I say that literally to say that it gives me joy to provide instructions and tools and resources to my non-melanated family of the divine to say, be an accomplice with me. However, there were times when I was watching the sessions that I was like, I don't think I would have been saved enough to respond in that moment the way that Dr. Kemp responded, with such grace and patience, because God is still working on me. So that was the face that I made. But I appreciate the elaboration that you gave, Dr. Kemp, of why you did this session in that context. Also recognizing who the senior pastor happens to be of that congregation as well. And I happen to be a student of hers as well while I was at Candler. So it was a mixture of emotions watching the session. But I do understand and appreciate your elaboration.
Yeah, and I think it's always that idea of what is our assignment, right? That each of us, we're fighting the same fight, but on different fronts. And so part of it for me is that God gives the grace for whatever assignment God assigns us to. And so there's a certain level with Dr. G as well. Like, you know, in one of the lectures, you saw me turn to her and say, I can't go there, can I? So there are those moments where it's like, okay, there are certain things that get triggered that I really want to address, but recognizing that in that moment will interfere with the work that's trying to be done in that context. So it is sometimes those wrestlings of, you know, I could go left, but I need to go right here. And so those are those kinds of battles that when you're in those kinds of spaces, again, there's a certain kind of equipping you have to have. Again, I don't do this every day, 24 hours every day, but for a certain context, for certain seasons, it's absolutely necessary.
Ty, give us some thoughts on as you were watching because I know you watched the other lectures as well, but we're specifically talking about this one about villains or potential villains. What were some of your thoughts or takeaways, or what does Dr. Kim say? Consternations? Yeah. What are some of those?
Well, so I'm clear. We talk about the white people, right? I just want to make sure. I want to stay on topic.
Oh my God, y'all see what I'm saying? Y'all see what I'm saying? First of all,
I just want to make sure I'm still on topic.
First of all, to all of our non-melanated siblings watching this, we are not villainizing any of you all. And Ty is from Duval County, and we will put a warning up that all opinions and thoughts shared on this platform are not that of the Reverend Dr. Joel B. Kemp. Anyway, so yes, we are talking about the workshop, and we were asking specifically Dr. Kemp, why did he feel called to be there to do that in this time? But I am asking you, did you have any feedback to watching him serve in that capacity? Ty, Brianna, Harris.
I think for me, because I'm such a people watcher, I was watching how language and stuff was like landing on other people and how their body was shifting and how their legs were crossing. So I think I was trying to figure out, are they intrigued by what's happening, or are they ready to, in a way, critique what is happening? And so when I was hearing their responses, I was not necessarily judging, but investigating from both perspectives. Is this a constructive conversation, or is this a criticism? And how is it beneficial to what you're learning or what you're being exposed
to? Thank you, young Black woman, talking to us, other Black folk, about Dr. Kemp's engagement with white people in that context in general. So, Dr. Kemp, would it be fair to say that this conversation or watching Joel's class made me think of when the prophets were called to talk to people who were difficult crowds? Yes, the message can be threatening to worldviews. Yes, thank you to our viewers who are helping us de-escalate Ty's question of, are we talking about the white people? Thank you. Dr. Kemp, is it fair or ethical to say that potentially race or the race conversation began with this character that we engage in this lesson, Cain?
Yeah, he's certainly one of the first.
Okay.
So that part of this idea of how race gets built using kind of Bible and theology in particular is you need to find a biblical origin for it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the arguments becomes, and again, not endorsing this, but this was a common argument, that it begins on day one of creation, right? Well, God says, let there be light, and he separates light from darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Some have argued that idea of lightness being whiteness, darkness being blackness, and then God separating the two is the origin of racial caste.
Nice. Nice. Thank you.
Right. That becomes a little harder to sustain because there are no people then.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to start figuring out, okay, so when do Black people as an entity enter the conversation? And so Cain becomes one of those entry points or one of those arguments. So we'll talk more about in the next lecture of how Cain becomes Black. So
Right.
it's this idea that if Cain becomes the first villain,
Mm-hmm.
then the sign of his villainy is blackness. Then all Black people who are descendants of Cain are necessarily villains, which leads to our exclusion from society, our exclusion from membership in the kingdom of heaven, exclusion from our membership in insert whatever you want to put at the backside of that sentence. So that's part of why Cain becomes an important figure, at least in the work that I'm doing.
Right. All right. So we're going to try our best, y'all, not to jump too much into that next lecture, because we do want y'all to watch that, because this one was so rich with so many questions. Dr. Kemp didn't jump right into that, the very clear racial connections and dynamics as it gets to Cain. But the woman that's on the line want to go back to the father of Cain. We want to go back to this Eve moment. So talk to us. You talked about it a bit. Listen, Brother Bennett, I'm going to call you the evangelizer of Glorilla and Meg. You need to go watch it, trust me. But Dr. Kemp, there were a lot of heavy things dropped in every single one of the lectures, but this one, what some people would call almost not conspiracy theories, but the ways that it has really disrupted traditional Christian views and reading of the scriptures, where they think we are first humanity. Nobody has considered populations outside of Adam existing. Nobody considered then father of Cain based off of the actual kind of literary or literalist reading both of the text. When you break down that the word, you can give us in a moment of like who was born, child, male, adult male, right, and what that looks like. But just to throw a little razzle dazzle on the line, would you mind repeating for the people watching today who now have to go back and watch that lecture? What is this theory of Eve and who she had relations with to produce Cain?
Who she knew. Who
Right.
she knew.
She knew in the biblical
Who
sense.
did
Right.
she know in the Bible?
Right. So the opening in Genesis 4 has this odd phrase where, Eve gets pregnant and gives birth to an Ish. Ish is the Hebrew word for man or male. And again, I made the joke, I think, in the lecture that I don't have a PhD in biology, but I'm pretty sure no one gives birth to a man. You may give birth to a male child, but not a man. And so that raises a question as to, well, if Eve gives birth to a man, then there must be something unusual about either that male figure who was born, which suggests something unusual about how that male child was conceived. So the argument that develops in certain traditions is that Eve had sex with a demon or some angelic figure that produced Cain. So that Cain comes out the womb as a full-grown man, which is not the normal biological process, which therefore suggests there had to be something extraterrestrial or supernatural involved. And so the kind of that origin story comes in. And then there are various traditions later that associate that with a demonic tradition, because that explains why Cain learned to murder.
Right.
One of the things the text doesn't answer is, where did Cain learn to kill and how did he kill him? And so if you place Cain's origins in kind of a spiritual demonic realm, then Cain's murder is simply an outgrowth of his very nature.
Right. And you mentioned this connection of who or what was the first thing named evil
Yes.
in Genesis, and who did you name?
Yeah. So you
Or
end
who
up
did you offer?
Yeah, so you end up with this interesting parallel linguistically of, in chapter 3, which is the famous fall story in Christian tradition, um, the only figure that is literally cursed using this Hebrew term arur is the serpent. And if were a good Bible going, Bible reading, vacation Bible school attending Christian, you learned early in your life that the serpent is Satan. So then the next figure that gets cursed with that same word is Cain. So what a lot of people have done is drawn the connection that if the serpent who becomes Satan is cursed and Cain is cursed, then maybe there is a literal genetic relationship between the serpent, aka Satan, and Cain. And so Satan becomes, the baby daddy drama.
Mighty Lamb. Now, dear womanist on this line, I'd like to pull you into this table. I want to ask you two this question. Dr. Kemp has offered now everybody on this here line tuning in. Dr. Kemp did not say these were his convictions and his perspectives. What is he? Our evangelist on the line said I'm about to test. Beloved, we welcome profanity on this here line.
Right. Just got to do it in Hebrew though.
You got to. Oh, Shanta. Okay, try it, man of God. And so I want to bring my womanist here on this line. I'd love to hear you all's thoughts. Dr. Kemp, again, we're sharing. Dr. Kemp is not, even in that class, he was not necessarily saying these are his convictions. What he's doing is teaching us what's out there, what's available to be aware of, to study and learn for oneself, because that is scholarship, that is discipleship, that is formation, right? I want to ask the womanist on the line, because there has been a direct, I love how Dr. Kemp offers us the one rooted in Hebrew language and rooted in just linguistic studies, this parallel between who is cursed. But you all know, as womanists, we go from the serpent being evil to people deeming Eve as evil, then for justifying Cain's behavior because of who his mama is and almost releasing Adam from said such. I want to know what you twos, I swear some of those old theologies were written by racist pervs on drugs. Goes Kitty. Go ahead and add a little cuss words in the middle of that if you like. Now, the woman that's on the line, Ty and Tiffany, tell me, what did your womanist spidey senses pick up when you were hearing that narrative told between who was cursed, the relationship between who was cursed, and then often who is deemed as evil right after the serpent, in light of the serpent's conversation with Eve, and also the distinction between the serpent not being Satan, but then being of Satan. So I'd like to hear you all's womanist musings, proclivities, and responses to that parallelization of evil and such.
Ty, you want to go first or you want me to? Okay. For me, what it brought up was it's always the woman's fault. It's always the woman who was promiscuous, for lack of a better word. So Adam couldn't have been the father of Cain because Cain is inherently evil. And so it had to be the mother's fault because the mother had to have sinned again. I believe, Dr. Kemp, you said that was her next sin, was that she knew the serpent or evil. And that's how Cain came to be into existence as man, not boy, not baby. And so for me, it just tied a thread of what women still go through today, how we are still demonized, how we are still told we can't stand in a pulpit, how we are still considered dirty, how we are still considered at fault for a lot of things. And it almost gave me another foundation, theological foundation and explanation for why some of that exists, just from that one thread of Cain did this thing. And I believe you talked about First John, and how, he talks about Cain and we don't want to be like Cain because Cain murdered his brother. Right. But still the justification for that is because Cain came from woman who also sinned. It wasn't Adam. It couldn't have been the man in the situation. It had to be the woman. It had to be that she knew someone else who was not supposed to be her partner and of his rib and, all that other good stuff. That's a whole other conversation. So that was like my initial thoughts of it's always the women.
Right. Exactly. That's part of kind of as Ty gets ready. One of the follow-up projects that I want to do is focus on how these passages not only define blackness, but get refracted to define black women. So that originally I was going to try to put it all in one book, but as I started doing it, I was like, that's going to take, the book will be 600 pages and no one will read a 600-page book. So kind of being able to pare it down to exactly that kind of thread, where what does it mean for the woman to now be tainted, in air quotes, by that in the same way, or a similar way, in the similar way as blackness gets tainted through that same story. So absolutely.
Ty, we're going to you, but I just want you all to know that sounds like an invitation for collaboration as doctoral students of Dr. Kemp. Move on.
Absolutely.
It's one that would be accepted and received, well received.
But Dr. Kemp, we're going to finish our degrees first. Go ahead.
Hallelujah. I was actually going to say something similar to what Tiffany said. And so, Dr. Kemp, if you're grading this, she cheated off my test. And
okay. So you'll get the credit.
Thank you. Like, bro. Anyway, but no, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment. It always, to me, makes me think of like, what do we deem evil and who do we deem evil? And so I'm always plagued by this audacity to have such for us to want to take such accountability, or the lack of accountability in evil as it relates to Black women, but there's no understanding there. And so we're quick to hold Black women accountable in evilness, but we're not necessarily intelligent enough to ask the correct questions as it relates to what is evil, who is evil, why is this thing evil. And so I think that when I was watching the lecture, I was like, I think the conclusion that I'm drawing is we're not inquisitive enough as people. And so we label things a thing, but we're not the people who go back to say, or even beforehand to say, let me go ask somebody who might be smarter than me, who might have a different lens to life. If what I am experiencing is a thing, or if what I'm experiencing is purely just my experience.
Now, Dr. Kemp, Todd leads us to this component of really almost how you started this lecture there with the paddles. I don't even know if is that what they were called?
Oh yeah, the little, yes.
This is me. I'm so Greek.
Thumbs up, thumbs down, right?
Woo, all right. Help us, Holy Ghost.
Right.
What I want to ask, well, first for fun, everybody, do you have a favorite villain? I know we talked about DC comic and Marvel comic, but in any kind of narrative animation, do you have a favorite villain? Can you just tell us who your favorite villain is? Tiffany,
Which I
go
want
ahead.
to say, I almost had to decline this when I heard that Dr. Kemp also liked DC. Like when you started with the I like DC and I didn't hear Marvel, I was about to say, oh, I got to disown him. Good
Then you heard,
afternoon.
right?
um,
Jesus.
I'm going to go with Harley Quinn.
Now, Tiffany, educate the people in case the people don't know where or who Harley Quinn is now.
Okay, so Harley Quinn is a DC comic villain and said to be Joker's girlfriend, but I just feel like she's really misunderstood. Bless her heart.
We're not. Let's leave that misunderstood because we're going somewhere with that. Ty, favorite villain, if you have one.
It's a toss up for me. Not necessarily that I don't have one, but I'm stuck between Cruella DeVille and Wednesday.
Beloved, we got Killmonger on the line. I don't. Did you just make Wednesday a villain? Okay, this is where we're going with this. We are going.
She absolutely got kicked out of school for beating up people. That's villain behavior.
Okay, but they were they not bullying her?
I mean,
like, she was also misunderstood.
That's fine. That's fine.
Agree with everything that she
did. Now okay, Dr. Kemp, favorite villain.
So I'll do a very specific expression of a villain. So Lex Luthor from the Smallville series, which is the early Superman story. So I'll be very specific as to which one is my favorite.
Oh man,
that is very specific because you could have done Lex Luthor on a couple of shows.
Yeah.
Mighty Lamb.
Dr. G's rocking with me. She said that's hers too. So
I see.
I got validation.
You all are so married. As soon as Reverend Dominique asked the question, I forgot every movie I ever saw or watched. Oh, come on. Drop your favorite villain in the chat, everybody. As long as it's not a real person that's going to see this. Huh? Help us.
Right.
Which is why I said narrative and story. I didn't say real life because all of us can name a real life villain somewhere in our life. Mine is, y'all could tell by the hair, I really love me some Cruella DeVille. And that's really because I'm classist and elitist. I like that she was after her money. But I'm also really torn. Now, this is a person that people might not see as a villain. But Pinky and the Brain really was trying to take over the world. And I don't know if everybody saw that as a positive. But so in light of that, here's the question as we are moving towards this conversation with Kane for the next lecture and things like that.
Make me want to change mine.
Okay, well, you can check because here's Dr. Kemp kind of highlighting that, obviously we do a lot of unfair assessment of people. We do allow what they do to make them who they are. Like we'll say, oh, they did something bad and we make them a villain, an entire totality of a person. But I love how what you are highlighting is character complexity or the complexity of a character development, right? Thank you, Dr. G. Brain is dope.
Because when you said Brain, it immediately made me think of Mandark from Dexter's Laboratory.
Oh, okay. Now, and my grandmother would tell you that them kids on the Magic School Bus were villains because I was doing a lot of stuff from the Magic School Bus and Bill Nye the Science Guy that was definitely disrupting the ingredients in the kitchen. But it goes back to what makes someone a villain. What makes them a villain? So there's an obvious moment. Cain kills Abel, right? But for any and everything else, what makes someone or something a villain? Which leads us to what you all were trying to highlight, or not trying, what you did highlight, is that they're misunderstood. There's some complexity to the development. There's something that happened to them. There's Dr. G is on the line. There was some childhood trauma that may have occurred that created them to be the type of persons that they are. And help me, Dr. Kemp. I feel like I might have this name wrong, but my other favorite villain is Shonuff. Is that his name?
From yes, that movie. Yeah. Okay, I'm with you now.
Yes. Somebody on the line. Dr. G said they need a little therapy. Every single villain needs therapy.
Yeah, it's the Bruce Leroy one.
The heroes need therapy too.
Is it
Last Dragon?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like Bruce Leroy one. Yeah.
Yes. So what makes something or someone? What makes them a villain? We named our favorite villains. What made them villains?
Right. So when we think about kind of in sort of the biblical context and of Cain, the very short answer is someone who violates God's rules. That becomes the short answer in the biblical tradition. And what ends up happening is that someone who violates God's rules in the reception history of that doesn't simply become someone who did a bad thing. They become a bad person. Right.
So,
And
Dr.
so,
Kim, when do we get the rule of not killing before
yeah,
Cain killed Abel?
exactly. So that's where kind of biblical scholars and rabbis and Christian interpreters have had to wrestle with. Technically, at that point, the only rule we've been given was don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Which y'all have heard me say this on lines before. The truth is, I'm gonna tell y'all, God has been the biggest villain I've met. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for those who are really wrestling with this theological concept right here. But I am blown away by a God who would put a tree in the center of a garden and then say, "Don't eat of it." Like that. That level of you, beloved Yahweh, all the names that Dr. Kemp has taught us. I think you a villain, but I don't want to say it too loud because I still want to meet you. I still want to make it to heaven. I still want to make it to glory. But breaking God's rule. I see Ghost Kitty says in Exodus question mark. And yes, potentially, but we're still in Genesis, right? We're still in
Right.
Genesis where Cain kills Abel. And if Dr. Kemp's definition or the offering of this definition, someone who breaks God's rule, and maybe the first rule we encounter is this not eating of this particular tree, then how is it then that what Cain does is deemed as evil? And again, we're back at what makes a villain. And Dr. Kemp, would not people decide to say that maybe Cain learned how to kill because of the way sacrifices were being made and offered? Because was this not based off of, some people argue, jealousy towards a brother because of his sacrifice being
Right.
accepted?
Yeah. So one of the challenges that often happens when we read biblical texts is that they're often very terse. That is, they're very short. They don't give us a lot of details. And so the question then becomes, how do we try to make sense of what we have? And often we fill in gaps with our imagination. Sometimes it's a sanctified imagination, other times it's not. But we try to fill in those gaps. And so one of the questions becomes, what was the sacrifice that would have been acceptable? Right? Did it have to be an animal? Or could it have been just grains? Was there something about the way Cain gave versus the way Abel gave that made it acceptable? So all of those things are unknown from the biblical text. So again, many trees have sacrificed their lives for people trying to answer that question. Um, but in the
Right.
context of sort of the villain question you had asked, the issue becomes, are you a complex character that sometimes does what is right and sometimes does what's wrong? Or as kind of Ty was suggesting, are you kind of flatlined and then easily pigeonholed to say, because you did X, you are that kind of person. And therefore we write you off as that person. And certainly when we get into the kind of how this gets racialized, it becomes very easy to just say black people are demonic, period. And look at what they do, right? Whether it's, since we were talking about kind of how this gets inflected through gender, and we started with Meg the Stallion, right? The ways in which she carries herself, many people view as being like the epitome of sexually inappropriate, promiscuous, and all the kind of labels that get attached to her, whether fair or unfair, just because there's certain, to me, that's part of one of the refractions of the 3Ds through gender. There's this kind of hypersexuality that gets attached onto people that people have to fight through. And so part of it, to me, in this villain conversation is, it's very simple. It's very easy to label a people something and then dismiss them. It's much more work to actually figure out individuals. And so, in honor of Dr. G, I'll use a psychological term, and she can correct me if I get it wrong, the fundamental attribution error. And the fundamental attribution error is simply this idea of, we're more likely to say someone else is what their bad actions are. But for ourselves, we'll give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and just say, I had a rough day today. So the fact that I look sideways at this person, that was just me having a bad day. But if someone looks sideways at me, I'm like, they're evil, they hate me, they're the devil's second cousin, and I'm going to take them out. And so we have that kind of fundamental attribution error.
Dr. G said you had the term correct. I wanna Tiffanie, Ty, thoughts on what makes someone a villain when or how do we give people the benefit of the doubt? And I love what my brother said in this line. At this point, if the rule was not to break, if it wasn't to break God's rule, then I guess we all are villains.
Every day. Well, according to whose rules? First of all, because Paul had different rules than some might argue than Jesus had. And what rules did Cain have? What rules did Abel have? What rules do we have? But to your question, someone during the session said something about noticing that films and shows are starting to write in more of the complexity of the characters. And as soon as they said that, exactly what Tyriana said came to my mind of, but we're not inquisitive enough to really be paying attention to that and be mindful of that when we're watching a Marvel comic or when we're watching Doctor Strange or something like that. Like, are we really being inquisitive enough to look at the complexities and pay attention to it? Or are we just watching the DC comic and watching them fight on screen and watching them kill Thanos? Like, at what point do we invite the inquisitive nature into the conversation to say, like some people were, given the side thumb, I can't answer that. I can't say yes or no or agree or disagree because there's complexities. But where's the balance of the inquisitive nature that we need in order to understand and interrogate those complexities?
That was smart. So the first thing I'm going to say is Dr. Kemp said the devil's second cousin. And since each of you are in a group chat with me somewhere, somehow, it's going to be used. And this was your warning.
Thank you for the warning.
You're welcome. You're welcome, because it blessed me to the core of myself. And I'm going to have to repeat it to somebody. Second thing is, so this conversation makes me think about a lot of things. And I think the first one is when we talked about Wednesday. There we are talking about a person, because if you actually watch the original Addams Family, the one that's in black and white, Wednesday never did anything without being provoked. She was minding her business every time. And then people started doing things they haven't business doing. And yet, did she go too far? Well, that's debatable. But things got handled. The other part to it is it also makes me think about the classroom. And so often there are things that happen in the classroom that as an educator, you're like, and so you have to constantly not freeze a child, an adult, a staff member in the time of which what they did that bothered you occurred. And it makes you a little bit more cautious when it happens to you and you want someone else to not freeze you in the time in which your occurrence occurred. And so I say that to say that I think that while words have meaning, we place meaning on such complex people. And I don't often think, again, that we take the time or the consideration that's necessary to understand why a person did a thing that they did. Not that it excuses it, not that it justifies it, not that it makes us feel any less of a way. But I think that we approach villain mindset or even heroic mindset based off of what we deemed a thing to mean, not necessarily considering how that thing will affect a complex individual. The last thing I'm going to say is I think we use language based off of how safe we feel in the moment. And so if a person does something to you that makes you feel unsafe, we are quick to place very demonstrative terms on them because we have been affected by what they said. That does not necessarily mean that what they said is any less impactful, but that does also mean that just because I've offended Tiffanie in that moment does not mean I am an offensive individual.
I think the different there, but that's neither here nor there. But I just want to also highlight the word demonstrative.
She used that.
You better come through Bethune-Cookman University, founded by the dumpster and the trash can. Y'all came out of there. What good come out of Nazarene? What good come out of Bethune-Cookman? Now I want to go to this chat right quick. Dr. G gave us, come on, a whole nerd moment over here, which I love. Come on, thank you. Regarding the tree and not eating rule, was it don't eat forever or could it have been just for a season? Rules and boundaries are good for the brain development. And she gives you a citation right there, beloved. Y'all go ahead and take some time and read that book. And that's a good question that I know theological ethicists are arguing with biblical scholars around the matter of, okay, did this conversation with the serpent and Eve disrupt the moment that this could have been just a seasonal quote unquote rule for brain development? And then I want to go here where Ghost Kitty says even the Dalai Lama, I think I said that right, says it's better to be mad at an action than the person. So like Dr. J says, when we make a person's action part of their permanent personhood, it's bound to turn toxic. Absolutely. So here's this fine line we're getting ready to move into for the next lecture that you all are going to engage and encounter, where this villainization of an individual, a person, an entity, however you believe these characters are in the Bible, get racialized. And we see now in American history or global history in some ways, because I don't know if the next time we gather to talk, y'all, we will be talking about, I'm going to at least be asking if you have watched Origin and or read Cast in light of the conversation with the Bible and race and conversation being developed, because now it's a conversation that just so here's your homework. Go watch it, watch Origin or read the book Cast for the next two conversations that we'll be having for Masterclass moments. But here's what I want to ask this kind of last question, because there's this fine line then between who or what a hero is and or who or what a villain is, because in some ways we believe in the transforming work of Jesus Christ, and we believe that that is what we begin to develop around, biblically at least, this hope, this work of these people who are working towards quote unquote a promised land, with being transformed in the process in the wilderness, and we get to this Jesus process, all that stuff. What happens when maybe both this person is both hero and villain, and quite comfortable with what you villainize as their heroic abilities?
Is that a question for all of us?
Yes.
When you just asked that, it made me think of something that someone else in the class said, of this hard line between darkness and light. And that I think they said something to the effect of, we understand that it's not like a switch, like there's a transition that has to happen. And I think when you think about villains or heroes, there's some kind of transition, just like with the prophets, just like there's a transition period. So at what point does a bad action become a pattern? At what point does childhood trauma become actions in adulthood? At what point, what's that transitional moment? Because to Dr. Kemp's point, if it's the breaking of God's rules, at what point have we all not been a villain or a hero? I can list politicians on both sides, and and my God, some of them visit both sides. But I think that it's easy to slip. We some of us say in the justice field of, we could all be one paycheck away from being part of the unhoused community that some of us are serving. We could all be one cuss word, one bad accident, one you call my mama a bad word, one, like, it could be one thing that'd be like, all right, and now today I'm going to jail. So I think, again, we have to leave room for the complexities, but also leave room for grace. There has to be grace in the defining of villain and hero, to understand that we are all creation, just trying to live out creation and do the best that we can with the interpretation of God's rules as they have been revealed to us.
Yeah, and I love that image of transition, because to me, one of the hero villain ideas is that in some ways it's a fallacy, right? That, as you were saying, Tiffany, in some ways, both of us, all of us deal with both of those elements. And so, again, good old Baptist coming out of a reformed adjacent tradition, right? If we accept that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, then in some meaningful way, right, aren't we all villains if we understand villains as sinner? And so, to go back to Ty's sort of preached moment at the beginning of this time, right? We just left a season where a hero was deemed a villain and killed as one. So perhaps we have the wrong image, the wrong idea about what heroes and villains are. And the challenge is, how do we get a more refined, a more complex one? That, again, if our Christ was deemed a villain, and he has become our hero, then what does that say about how we use those categories?
And what would have happened had he been given the grace that we are given today in some instances? Mighty
Now,
God.
Tiffanie, I don't know, because I don't know then if I would have a savior. So maybe, just maybe, I'm glad them Negroes back then didn't give him no grace, because somebody, the perfect sacrifice, had to go, since that's what they say in the Bible. Now, Ty, you didn't got caught up. We don't have no ushers over there for
Jesus, that
I
thing
need,
tore me
I
up.
need you to
Y'all
come
know
out
it
the
don't take much for me to run.
come out
Don't
the
do
glory now. I need you to come out the glory and tell us, because we, you fall out over there. We're just gonna take your photo. We're gonna take your little camera off the platform. So
Right.
you just
call
text us when you get off the ground now.
Right. Call
And
for the
I'm
nurse
not
to come
getting in
by.
my car.
No, we're not driving over there with no sheets. You're gonna have to get yourself up. In the good old Pentecostal church, you fall out, it better be the spirit. Because when you hit your head, it's between you and your God. Now,
Tell me, what do you serve?
tell me, Cruella DeVille, how do you feel about this double-sided coin of both and Tiffany told us about some grace to be offered for both the hero and but Dr. Kemp done preached us. I don't even know. Is this the altar
He
call?
did. He
Tell us,
really
what do you
did. Jesus, I feel like I'm supposed to get a benediction.
First of all, y'all on this line, allow me to be good in Methodist. You and Tiffany cannot give the benediction.
This
You
is a
all
fact.
are on ordination track, and you're incapable of giving the benediction.
This
And
is
that's
a
in case anybody from Holy Orders is watching. I want you to know that both Ty and Tiffany know better. But go ahead.
I mean, it again makes me think about like so many things. I think there is a really good conversation about this idea of needing to be black and white. Like there has to be some area of gray in life, and yellow, blues, and greens, because we are still human. And so I can't speak for nobody else, but I can only speak for me. I think I intend to wake up every day and be a solid individual. That does not mean that other people see that for my life. And so therefore I have to make conscious decisions on whether or not this is going to be a heroic moment, or like Tiffany said, if I'm going to jail today. And because of that, I take that same consideration for other people, and I just thank God for Jesus. But to your villain conversation, I think that it really makes me think about what Dr. Robinson said about view. Not necessarily, that was not her theological claim. It was a question on the table when she said, talked about God as a villain. I mean, and if you think about it, we understood why God did what God did. Does not make what God did any less wild than it was. Throughout the entire biblical text, we watch God do what God does. And in our great Christian aspect, we commit to saying, I mean, I get it, but that does not make God any less wilder than God was. I mean, I'm just saying. The other part to it is, are we not just as wilder? So I think my conviction is the thing that compels me is on the moments in life when I want to be wild, I'm very grateful that I serve a wild God. And so it compels me to not go out there and act like I don't have no sense, because in the moments when God needed to act like she didn't have no sense, she did it just enough for me, and I'm good.
Right. Yeah.
That'll preach.
You know what, Dr. Kemp, don't bring Eminem back on this line, because they we don't have enough ushers available to do. Come on, that'll preach. Y'all, we know you're tuning in. We know we're keeping you a little bit beyond the hour we started. We didn't really start late. We gave the ushers, let y'all come in on Color People time to start in a little later. I want to say this and then ask the two for final comments before Dr. Kemp closes us out. I will be really honest and say this. I lean into my villain identity more often than not, because I see what others deem as villain behavior as my methodology for getting to the hope and the good. And so I also am very clear, because, which is what Dr. Kemp is getting to in the next lecture, because of my identity, the behavior is villainized, because I am young, Black, female, overeducated, confident, and eloquent, as the white people would say at times, and Jersey tone, like all the things that are already demonized for what we'll find out in the next lecture and in the book that is coming out. I leverage those villainizations for what it is I know God is trying to do. You all know I serve in a predominantly white Episcopal environment. And on today, literally, some people would say I got up and chose violence. I was very clear that when I started my class, that I was going to tell them together, if y'all think the next time I do something that you don't like, you can send an email to the dean. You should try that again. But I was really clear that I was going to come, and what you were going to be offended because it was me saying it to you, but it was me telling you, I know what you did and I am not afraid, right? So I lean into that a little bit more than my kind of sweet, kind, heroic side, but I see my villainization as heroic tendencies for the greater good. And so there are times that, like you all said, the grace, the complexities, and the intentionality of what it is we're going to do. But I think that grace is more important when we don't have the intention behind it, that something just happens, it just occurs. And I think that more importantly, Dr. G probably is going to back me up, we got to begin to offer ourselves as much grace as we offer others. I think we villainize ourselves, especially Black folk, a lot more. We do so much more harm to ourselves mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We demonize ourselves, and then try to live out in a world where they also demonize us. So we don't do a good enough job of remembering that sometimes just us showing up is heroic. Just us showing up into places. Our presence is prophetic. It disrupts simply just by showing up. Our presence is there. So with that, Eminem, TNT, any final thoughts, comments, concerns, consternations, as Dr. Kemp would say? And then we are passing the virtual mic back to the president, the founder, the curator, the master DJ of this here virtual platform, digital platform, lectures and books coming out, the chief apostle of all Hebrew scholarship. Huh? Y'all like that? Because I grew up in the Pentecostal. I give the titles of beloved. He, the Levite, the apostle, the recovering addict. He is the man with the D of God that we are excited about to be. So final thoughts from our own version of Eminem's
screaming. I think, did you say you choose violence?
I did. And I do.
Yeah.
And you too
I love that for you.
You too can testify that to that.
I love that for you. I mean, I don't think I choose violence. I also don't choose heroism either. I think I let people lead the conversation, and whatever you start is how I intend to finish it. So if you want to choose violence, I'm going to end with violence. I mean, but the last thing I will say is every villain had a reason and every hero broke a law. So choose ye this day.
Well, bloop. You're not wrong. Well, I always say my Jesus flipped tables, and so do I. So I'm not saying I don't wake up in the morning saying which table am I going. I'm not gonna lie. Yes, I do. I absolutely do wake up sometimes and say which table am I going to flip today. But because I work in two very difficult systems of church and state, those are two systems, in my opinion, through my lens, that require some tables to be flipped because, as Dr. Robinson said, I'm trying to get to the hope and the change. So I will say I flip tables as my Jesus does. And all I can do is agree with what you also said, Dr. Robinson, of we're demonized too much in the world. And so something I am consciously working on is not villainizing myself, even in small situations of not apologizing anymore. Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes said this at a recent conference: stop apologizing. And so shifting the language, like Tyriana said, finding other language, being inquisitive with myself as I am with others. I've been told that my questions can kind of hit you in the chest because of the way that I ask them, not in a disrespectful tone, but more in a, that made sense to you? Help me come to where you are. So I'm working on language of, I'm not saying I'm sorry, I'm saying thank you for your grace. And shifting in that way so that, as Dr. Kemp said earlier, I can be the teacher without necessarily always being on the front lines.
Tiffanie, I think you should know that Dr. Robinson does a very, very sophisticated thing that I'm going to achieve one day. Usually when violence has been chosen onto her via the text message, she responds with a question. And I just think that is just so intellectually brilliant to have done, because the way there, you could go a lot of ways with that. But if you just get 6 different text messages, the end and a question mark, you know that was the wrong move. You have officially chosen the wrong move.
I mean, you said it. Inquisitive is the way to go.
Exactly.
Right, and
Bring it full circle.
Right. And I would like to properly cite that came from my godmother, Mrs. Ingrid Flack Hunter, who was an IBM official. She was like one of their top executives. And she used to always tell me, she was a chocolate round Black woman. And she would say, in order to make sure my white colleagues knew how ridiculous this situation was, I would simply ask them the question back. Did you just am I understanding that you are surprised that I am articulate? Help me understand how you are surprised. So I have now, as now being a student of rhetoric, decided that it is a rhetorical strategy that is extremely effective because it offers space for grace. Right. All right. Thank you, TNT, Eminem. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Watchers for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. G, for being in the chat. Thank you, Ghost. We got consistent followers of Masterclass Moments and Just Enough Light that stay on the chat. We appreciate y'all. We ask y'all to tag, share, repost. We give a shout out to our behind the scenes man, JT, who continuously makes sure that this work, this scholarship is continuously presented with excellence in all the ways. And we're grateful, Dr. Kemp, for you allowing us to share this time with you and conversation with you. And we thank you for your heroic abilities to serve in various contexts that all of us are not called to serve.
Thank you. Let me first begin by thanking my family. That's what you three are, so family. So I thank you all for being with us and joining us. And if you'll be back, we'd love to have you back and do this again. So again, as Dominic did, just thank all of you for tuning in. I know we kept you a little over, but I do want to close with one last thought that was going through my mind through part of our end of our conversation. Kind of this interesting thread between the Jesus who flips tables, the God who is wild, and the villainy that needs to hope. That's where that thread had just been kind of running through me. So there's an interesting concept from one of my former teachers, and I'll remix it Dr. Kemp style, where he argued that the greatest problem of modern Christians is that we try to domesticate God. We try to reduce God to something that is familiar and understandable. And in the result of that, we miss who God really is and who God has called us to be. So for me, one of the things about how we can deal with this villainy, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the Christian tradition is rooted in a villain. It's rooted in a God who violates the rules. But in the violation of that rules, that God argues, through my death, there is liberty and there is freedom. What a noble call that we have an opportunity to follow. So here at JEL, we hope that as we study this development through the Hebrew Bible, that one begins to see exactly how it is that this God does exactly that. My wife has been fond in recent days of quoting the Pandora's box, that when all the chaos came out, the last thing in Pandora's box was hope. The last thing was hope. And in this season of Easter, the last thing that comes out of that tomb is hope. So it is our prayer here at JEL that as you leave this podcast, as you leave this live, you remember that God who rose from the dead has given you just enough light for the step you're on. God bless you and see you next time on Masterclass Moments with Dr. Joel Kemp.
The Hebrew Hotline is a dynamic resource that provides insightful and inspirational engagement of biblical Hebrew to Christian leaders, seminarians, and laity. The Hotline will assist you in providing an in-depth exegesis, contemporary hermeneutical transfer, and practical application for your sermons, Bible studies, presentations, and lectures. Visit our website and schedule your Hebrew Hotline session today.